drunk redneck truckers are trying to have their way with me!
Not while my scrotum is pressed up against my stomach in these jeans, they won't. Roadhouse.
And welcome back to the Movie Pope podcast. And today we are going to take a look at two versions of Roadhouse, the classic 89 version with Patrick Swayze and the 2024 version with Jake Gyllenhaal. And we did do a trailer reaction to that earlier this year, so check that out. The link is in the description below. But before we dive in, remember to like, comment, subscribe, and let us know which movies or TV shows you want us to take a look at, either individually or as a duo. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Let's dive in. So, Lee, so it was a bit of a shock that that they decided to go and do a remake of a classic movie. But
yes.
but as we said in the reaction to the trailer, I mean, it's also not that surprising because they're kind of dipping into the toy box to see what else they can sort of revamp. So why don't you go ahead and take us through the journey that is Roadhouse 89 and Roadhouse 24.
Yeah, and I think for this, I think it's important just to talk about kind of the differences between the two, because for the story, it's almost beat for beat the same in each one of them. So instead of kind of going through the normal way where it's like we kind of talk through it, we're going to talk a little bit about the story, but then I think we're going to focus a lot more on kind of the differences and which ones we prefer.
Well, the biggest difference, obviously, let's just get that out of the way. One is in Missouri and the other one's in Florida. So
sure, yeah, that's a very noticeable difference. But yeah, I guess just the story, right? Just to get out of the way, and like I said, this is the same story for both. So you could say it for both of them, it'll be true. So you got a character named Dalton. I like how they're both named Dalton. There's not really, I guess, a reason other than, I guess, a nice callback to the original one, but they're both named Dalton. They're both kind of I think in the first one, they reference Patrick Swayze as something called a cooler, whereas, Dalton in the 2024 version was an ex-MMA guy, but pretty much they're a bouncer, right? And they're pretty much hired to go to a roadhouse where you have the most unruly characters in the world. These are literally, I would say, anytime someone can throw a punch or get into a fight, there must be something in the water wherever they're at, because they're just constantly on edge and wanting to murder everybody. So Dalton gets to this roadhouse. There's this nice, friendly community around him where there's these good people. But then there's this bad guy, and this bad guy is, trying to do something really villainous. So he's trying to kind of exert his force over the community. So as things escalate, Dalton, kind of is gets pushed too far, and he's like, okay, I got to put my foot down and, resolve this shit. So in both cases, Dalton ends up, going out there, kills the bad guy, and rides off into the distance. And that's pretty much it. Did you want to say anything to this story? I just didn't even feel like there was a whole lot of, I don't think you're watching this for the plot. Let's just put it like that.
Yeah, I mean, I will say this, with the 89 version, you sort of get this air of mystery around, Patrick Swayze's Dalton, because you sort of know who he is, but he really doesn't give too much away, right? Whereas with Gyllenhaal, it's like he's a former MMA fighter who killed a guy in the ring.
Well,
is there anything else?
They do play that though as a mystery, though, right? Because we don't know what happens. Right?
Yeah, but it's not subtle. You know what I mean? It's
no, of course not. He has clear flashbacks that you're seeing. So yes, it's definitely not subtle. But yeah, I guess if you're to look at it, right, the Dalton obviously is the big person in this. So I think a good place to start is just to talk about them. Mm-hmm. I mean, both of them are total badasses, right? Patrick Swayze is a badass, And I'm gonna give props to Jake Gyllenhaal there. Like the guy looks absolutely cut for this movie, right? I mean, guy looks great. There ain't no way around it. Like both these guys, I think kind of embody that idea of a really rugged, good-looking guy that I think any male would like to like be in their shoes for a little while, so to speak, right?
I mean, I will say this. I mean, Gyllenhaal, looks more cut than Swayze,
Oh,
but
sure, yeah, and I think some of that deals too with the timing. Like,
yeah.
I think nowadays we start to see more of that physique, whereas it just wasn't very prominent back when Swayze was doing it. But yeah, I would definitely say, kind of looking at it through a lens now, then yeah, like I would say Jake has just the kind of the better physique, like you pointed out.
But I mean,
But it's,
but here's the thing though, because I mean, like, in comparison, I mean, Swayze, looks more cut than, than most of the other people in
yes,
Jasper. Whereas, whereas in I think was it Glass Key, Florida, like for the most part, everybody kind of looks like they're ripped. I mean, even I forget what that kid's name was, but I don't know if he's like the bartender or like the other bouncer, but he look,
yeah,
for a young guy, he looks fairly, jacked. So,
yeah,
so you kind of get the feeling that everybody at Glass Key, is moderately like, stacked in terms of the muscle department. And then Jake Gyllenhaal kind of like strides in, and he's like, okay, he looks a little bit more cut than the rest of us, but he kind of still fits in that whole, box of, common muscle, jock type, shapes, as it were.
yes, yeah, no, yes. So, yeah, but so like I guess when I look at Swayze, right? I look at someone like his character, how he portrays Dalton. He's got so much charm and charisma about him. Like it's hard not to like him. He kind of has this whole idea that he, wants like everyone to just put like a smile on their face, and you're trying to kill him with kindness. It's just hard not to really like him. And I think because he has that type of charisma around him, the way he interacts with the community of people around him just feels a lot more real, right? Like he kind of befriends the auto repair shop guy, right? He kind of has this kind of close connection with the person's barn that he's renting out, right? So you see how Swayze's Dalton gets to kind of interact with the community, and then we also see how he gets to meet his love interest, right, the doctor. And it feels very believable. Like you could totally see Swayze kind of getting caught up in all this just with the type of persona that he has. Not to mention that a nice thing that they add in is Sam Elliott, who's a total badass.
Mhm.
And even though he's only in the original one for like 20 minutes, he still does awesome job with this time. Even though I did find it kind of like off-putting, it felt like he was hitting on his girlfriend the whole time. So I don't know how I would feel about that if my.
But I mean, like that was the attitude back in the day. People were
Sure.
just a bit more open, more flirtatious than they are now.
Sure. I guess that's one way of looking at it. But yeah, like it definitely was quite interesting. Whereas with Gyllenhaal's, like he was more awkward. Like he just didn't. He always felt like awkward. There's like this air of mystery around him because of like these flashbacks that you're getting. Like granted, like you said, it wasn't subtle, but I was always wondering, like, okay, what is this gonna actually tie back to in the grand scheme of things? And because of he's so awkward, like it just never felt like he really connected with people around him.
Yeah, he was kind of more. He was more guarded, than
Yes.
Swayze's character.
Yeah. Like the only person it felt like he really opened up to was like the little girl, or I should say little girl because she's older, but like the tween teenager girl.
Yeah, the
that
bookstore.
was over at
Yeah,
the
the bookstore
bookstore.
girl, yeah.
So he seemed to really open up with her, but that was like it. And even the quote unquote love interest, it was totally unbelievable. Like it was like they almost felt like they had to put her in because the first one had it, but in the second one they totally squandered it. I didn't believe in the relationship at all. And to me, I really like Swayze's portrayal better as Dalton. I really like the charisma. I felt like he interacted so much better with the community, and I think that's what gave him more character. Whereas for Gyllenhaal, like, yeah, he was kind of quirky. I did like some of his like kind of awkward comedy beats, but it just fell flat in too many other areas.
Well, I was gonna say,
What are your thoughts on them?
Well, I was gonna say because with Swayze, the reason why he was brought into Double Deuces was to manage the security team. So it kind of lays down the ground the ground rules and says we're gonna do this my way. Whereas in the other one, when Frankie hires Dalton, it's more of like I was originally gonna ask this guy, but then I saw you, so I might as well just ask you to basically be the bouncer. That's it. Like that. I mean, there's nothing else to it. She just needs some extra muscle to to handle that. So I kind of wish they would go a little bit more detail about maybe maybe she needs him to like help train the staff or something like that. But I don't know. I guess that I guess that was just a bit too much of an homage if they did it that way.
Yeah.
Although we did get to see Post Malone in the opening fight sequence.
That's true. That's true. Even though he cops out of fighting with Jake Gyllenhaal's Dalton there. But yeah, he was there. Now, I will talk about this, right? Because we talked a little bit about the flashbacks, right? So how did you feel about his flashbacks? So for me, like, I didn't understand how it tied into the story. Like, I get that the whole idea is that for him, like, he had so much rage in him that he just kind of lost sight of everything, and he kills his friend, right, in this UFC title fight. So I was like, okay, so like, are we supposed to like see him like take kind of a different stance where he doesn't want to hurt people again? But then that doesn't really happen. So I don't know. Did I miss something, or why did we care about this mystery around him killing his friend during this UFC title fight? Am I missing something?
I mean, I think there's no context to it. Like they just say, "Oh, you killed a guy," to sort of make him sound like he's dangerous. But I think ripping someone's throat out, is far more menacing, more dangerous than just beating someone up in the in an octagon. Because I mean, like, because one, if you are going to have the flashbacks, I think you should have a little bit of context as to what kind of led up to that. Like maybe the friend did something that kind of pissed him off, or or maybe there was a rigging in the fight and he kind of just overdid it. But I mean, like, I think it would be better if you just dispense with the whole flashback altogether and just kind of like make it verbal. Like maybe he just admits, I killed someone once and I'm not proud of it, and kind of just leave it at that. You know, because then that would keep with the whole I'm just gonna keep my emotions and myself guarded, not tell anybody.
Yeah, there's no payoff for the way that they depict it in the movie. Whereas, like you pointed out, if you just flat out say it, it's like, okay, we as an audience understand it and we can move on. Like, don't create mystery around something if you're not gonna ultimately pay it off.
Because they were dragging it out the entire time. I'm like, okay, so are we gonna like see someone from his MMA days like show up at the bar and like with Garrett? But no, nothing like that ever happened. All we just see is Conor McGregor just like walk in and be like, "Oh, are you gonna kill me too? You should at least be friends first." I'm like, "Oh, fucking hell, man."
Yeah, I don't know, but hey, that's a great segue because I think we should talk about the villains, right? And I mean, the villains in both, they weren't that good, right? Like, am I alone in saying that the villains were very interesting?
Well, I will say this, like at least in the new version, you can sort of understand his motivation, because he basically just wants to buy up the land where the Red House sits and develops it. Whereas in the first movie, he's just an asshole, but you don't know why he's an asshole.
Sure.
Apart from maybe running a protection racket or something like that.
Because like in the '89 version, right, you got Wesley, who's kind of the overarching villain, and like you pointed out, he doesn't really have a strong sense there. It does seem like he's shaking people down, and he has all this pull, so it's just kind of like, I don't know, a smug guy doing smug guy things. And then he kind of has this like henchman, right? That's also kind of the top henchman, right? That he kind of brings in later.
Yeah, Reno.
Yeah, and both of them are just kind of forgettable. I always it was always weird to me how they had in the original one, the '89 version, right? So you got Swayze going against Wesley, and it always felt like this isn't really a fight. Like, we know in reality that Swayze would absolutely kill this old guy in in a second. Like, there was never any tension there. It's just because, like, oh, this is the final bad guy. We got to make him strong, but it never made any sense. And then for the henchman guy, and I'm sorry, what'd you say his name was again?
Which one?
The henchman that was under Wesley in the original.
Oh, Reno.
Reno, thank you. So then you have Reno, and Reno, like, I mean, the guy clearly, like, I think I looked him up, like, the guy has military experience, like, the guy is probably a realistic badass, right? But in this, it's so weird, and then there was this one line, right, that always got to me whenever I saw it, and I want to see if you have the same reaction, too. It's when Reno and Swayze are fighting right after the old guy has his house blow up, right? They're fighting, and Reno like says to Swayze, like, "Hey, you know, I effed guys like you in prison."
I used to fuck guys like you in prison.
And I was like, "Wait a minute, what is this? Is that like supposed to be like intimidating?" I don't know. Do you ever find that quote weird? I don't know why, but that quote always sticks out in my brain. Why he says that?
So the guy was in prison. That was my main thing. Like when I was watching, I'm like, okay, so he was in prison, and then he got out, and he kind of, he made someone his prison yard
Yes.
wife.
So, yeah, and I'm like, is that supposed to be intimidating? Like, I don't know. I found that more like found that more awkward than anything. I don't know if that's, maybe back then that was like something of like, oh, that makes me so cool. But I don't know. I guess through the lens nowadays, it just seems like an awkward line. Whereas I guess if I have to give a positive to the 2024 version, I mean, the main villain in the 2024 is even more forgettable than Wesley. And as much as I don't like Conor McGregor, and I really dislike him, and I will say at least he's built up as a legitimate foil to Jake Gyllenhaal's Dalton. That's the only thing I'll say about that.
Yeah, I agree.
Conor McGregor, like, he clearly is like a guy, he could actually kick ass. And I'll give Conor McGregor some props, right? Like, I mean, he's never acted before. I don't believe he has. He definitely went out there and did what he wanted to do. But I'll give him some credit as like, okay, at least I felt like it gave something of Jake Gyllenhaal's Dalton to actually go up against in the final part of it. So I'll give it a slight bonus to that part.
Because if you think about it, like he is a pretty good foil to Dalton, because they're both these jacked up fighters. So you could sort of believe that they could sort of go toe to toe with each other and kind of come out in a draw. Whereas with Reno and Dalton in the original version, it kind of feels like Dalton's just buying his time. Like he really he is pretty intimidating, but I mean, at the end of the day, like he's not really on the same equal footing as Dalton in the '89 version.
Yeah, I totally agree. So yeah, I guess like villains, I would probably give maybe a slight advantage to 2024, but like I said, that's kind of really nitpicking because they're pretty much forgettable in both versions.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And I think the other thing that was, I would say, very different between these two, probably the thing that's the most different, is just kind of the tone of the films. I would say for the '89, it definitely feels like that '80s sleazy action movie where you got like all this random nudity. I like how there's like a sequence where they have a monster truck and they just like plow through a car dealership.
Oh yeah.
It's just like, it's totally off the wall. And I like how they just kind of like, they don't really like show the police a whole lot in the first one, which I kind of liked, because it's so unbelievable that anyone would exert that much power over the police that it's just better just not to discuss it, because then you don't think about it. Because he's like sitting there, like there's all this stuff being blown up, like he blows up the house He blows up the auto part place. He blows up the house of the guy that Swayze's renting from. Like, he does just all this shit that's just so blatant over the top. And it really is a movie that it's for something that I think a lot of people think of as campy, which it is. It does kind of have a very dark overtone to it, right? Like, it's not a very there's not a whole lot of lighthearted moments. It's fairly dark, and like I said, even for like something like Sam Elliott that gets killed off, like it definitely plays like a very kind of depressing movie, all things considered. So, but yeah, how did you feel about the '89 and just kind of the world that they build with it?
I mean, with the '89 version, like you said, they were definitely going for that more of like a dark, gritty, almost neo-western kind of
Yeah,
vibe because at the end of the day, Swayze comes off as the more intimidating figure because you hear all these stories about, oh yeah, that's Dalton. He killed a guy once, and you learn more about how he killed the guy. Yeah, he ripped his throat out, and then you actually see it, and you're like, okay, yeah, this is clearly messed up. Whereas with the 24 version, I wouldn't say it's that lighthearted, but it's a lot it's a lot more lighter in tone than when compared to the '89 version. I mean, obviously you're going to have the characters cracking jokes a lot more and just having conversations about the most random thing. I think at the beginning of the movie they talk about, was it Freddy? Was that tree that grows on the bridge that came
yes.
up came up, and then later on, Dalton and the doctor, they talk about conch for some reason when he's at that restaurant eating eating chowder. So so you do have a bit more of this like open, lighthearted nature to it when compared to the '89 version, because the '89 version, everybody's just like, it's just blood and tits everywhere. Everybody's just like beating the shit out of each other. Things are getting burned down. Um, people are just threatening each other. It's just like this one huge violent slugfest, which which when you think about contextually, it's not too surprising because the movies back then were a lot more violent, a lot more darker than the movies being made today. Because
Sure.
movies made today, you always have to have like this comic relief moment or a character who brings in the comic relief, or just random dialogue to kind of ease the tension, right?
Yeah.
So it'd be very, very much off-putting if Swayze just like talks to Reno and they start chatting about milking cows, for instance. It wouldn't fit the same way that that you would see in in the new Roadhouse movie.
For sure, yeah, because in the new one, and like you pointed out, it just felt like there was constantly like quips happening where it's just like, oh, they kind of throw in this, like when he's fighting Conor McGregor, like uh, Jake's Dalton gets thrown like against a piano, and he's like, oh, this sounds out of key, and I'm like, okay, like I don't know if I'm in the middle of a huge fight that I would be making like these jokes. I get that maybe it kind of goes once again to kind of how Dalton in the newer version is different in that fact, but it is very odd how that kind of happens. And there was just a lot of that stuff. Now, I will say there is that one character, right, that was a part of in the 2024 that was kind of like you point out, he's the comic relief character, and he didn't make me laugh. So as dumb as I found the remake version, there were times where I was like, okay, that was actually kind of funny. And there's even a sequence where like Dalton, like after he beats up the guys, like the first night, he drives them to the hospital, and it's just like, okay, like I wasn't expecting that. Like in the first one, it was very dour. There was never any kind of anything to break the tension, but in this one, it happens all the time. So I guess depending on what you're in the mood for, you might prefer one over the other. But yeah, I would say if I was to like pick one, the original one, right? To me, Swayze's portrayal of Dalton is just better. I think that his characterization is just better than what they did with Jake's version in the 2024. I just found like Swayze, just how he interacts with the community. You really see him kind of create these bonds with these people. So when Wesley, the villain, decides like, oh, I'm gonna go up there and I'm gonna start, attacking everything that is around there. You really feel for the character. Like you really believe that Swayze is just so unhappy with everything that's going on that he just, he wants that revenge. And I think Swayze does such a good job of kind of teetering on that guy that's kind of like on the edge of like totally snapping, right? Like he kind of plays that line very well. Whereas with the 2024 version, I think because Gyllenhaal's Dalton, because he doesn't really bond with a lot of people, he's just kind of there, and like obviously we don't want to see anything happen to him, but like he doesn't have the same level of motivation I think I would have felt in the first one. I think maybe something they could have done a little bit differently was I actually was kind of wondering, like, it would have been crazy if they killed the girl that was at the bookstore. Like, to me, that was his one real connection with that community, because I was like, dang, like that would have took a lot of guts in a movie to have them kill a young character like that, but that would have given him so much more motivation to do stuff. Because, like I said, for most of the final part, it's him going after the doctor, right? His quote unquote girlfriend, but the relationship comes out of thin air. So it's like, I don't really care about what happens. Like, I'm not really invested.
I mean, they could have spent more time with having Dalton kind of develop these relationships instead of breezing right by it.
Of course, yeah, absolutely. Like they had a ton of options there, and they just didn't do it. And both the movies are about the same length, but man, it feels like the first one covered so much more than the second one ever did, and they're about the same runtime. So it's kind of bizarre how that worked out too. But yeah, I would say the only thing I would kind of give the 2024 kind of a little bit of an uptick on was, like I said, I think Conor McGregor, as much as I don't like him, I think he actually did play kind of that ultimate villain role better than anything in the first one. And depending on how you like this, like I did kind of chuckle at some of the comic relief in the first ones, in the remake. But like I said, everything else to me leans towards with the first one. So I would definitely say first one's better, but the second one, it did okay. Like I think they really missed how they portrayed Dalton in the remake, but there was some things that they did okay with. But I think the first one definitely sticks out as a better film.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you on that one too, because I mean, you can't beat the original, really. And it's funny because both these movies were made by MGM, so so you think they would have a better understanding of how to approach the the material, but I will say
just
this:
mere 35 years apart.
Yeah, that's true. But I mean, like we've seen this before, in film and television in the past. I mean, obviously we did a review of Ghostbusters Afterlife recently, where we chatted about how how they're trying to update Ghostbusters for the modern audience, but still kind of having a callback to the original, or a big one that comes up for me is Hawaii Five-O, where they were trying to do a remake of it, but they kind of kept the characters' names the same. So you still had a Steve McGarrett, but this McGarrett was very much different from Jack Lord's portrayal from the 60s and 70s. Now, what I will say for the remake, and I mentioned this before already, with the villains, you may not like them, but you kind of understand where they're coming from. You kind of know what makes them tick and what's their motivation for doing what they do, right? Whereas with Wesley, it's like, well, he's just being an asshole just for the sake of being an asshole, right? He just he figures, I've got the money, I've got the big house, I can pretty much do whatever I want in this community. But at the same time, I mean, Swayze has this presence, like you can believe he is Jim Dalton in this movie. Whereas with the 2024 movie, I feel like if you take Jake Gyllenhaal out and put him with replace him with any other actor, I mean, I really wouldn't be that bothered about it, just because of the way he Jake Gyllenhaal portrays the character. It's so what's the word I'm looking for? It's not very memorable. It doesn't stand out, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think one of the characters kind of describes him as like he kind of behaves like Mr. Rogers, sort of. So I'm like, well, Well, if that's the case, you know you can get like an older guy, um, and he'd be much more believable in portraying this nice jacked guy who can
Yeah, like Tom
beat him by his
Hanks.
ass. Yeah, exactly like Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks with a six pack. So so really the way that Swayze came to the character, is much more believable. The relationships were a lot more organic, and the air of mystery about him is just more believable because he cultivates and he maintains this air of mystery throughout the entire film. And even at the end when you see him like finally like kind of let go of his demons and kind of enjoy himself by swimming in the lake, you still kind of get this feeling, oh, there's still a lot about him I don't know, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Whereas with Dalton from the 2024 version, it's like, oh, so he's just a UFC fighter who's down on his luck. Okay. What else? I mean, what you see is what you get with the 2024 version. But I will say, like, if this is a movie that you just want to watch just for the hell of it, and if it pops up on your Amazon feed, then by all means watch it. But I would definitely recommend checking the original version first, because at least that way you kind of get the idea of where the new movie's coming from and what they're trying to do. Now, bless them, they are trying to do something different with it. They're trying to put their own modern interpretation on it, but I feel like if you were gonna watch Roadhouse, watch the original and kind of just leave it at that. Um, so is there like an overall score you want to give for both of these
Sure.
movies?
So I think for the original one, right, I would say I would probably give it 3 roundhouse kicks. I feel like it does enough to like kind of have that cult appeal to it, right? There's tons of action in it. Like the portrayal of everything. Sam Elliott is always such a cool character. Patrick Swayze just does such a great job in it. So I mean, it's hard not to really like it for just being kind of this dumb action flick. So I would give it, like I said, 3 roundhouse kicks out of 5. For the new one, like I said, there was parts of it. I wish they did Dalton's character different. I think that was kind of a big letdown there. But I still think it did some things well. Like there are some cool action set pieces. And as much as, like I said, I didn't care for Conor McGregor, I know in real life, like he's definitely someone that can kick my ass very easily, and it's very believable in this too. So I would probably give the new one, I would say 2.26 packs out of 5. And I think it's fine for what it is, but it definitely doesn't capture, I think, what people really enjoy from the first.
Yeah, so for the original, I'm gonna give it 3.5 out of 5 roundhouse kicks. I mean, just because it's just so enjoyable, and if I may be subjective for a little bit, I mean, it really kicks into the to those childhood memories of having watched it when I was younger with my parents, right? So for me anyway, I'm always going to have this sort of sense of nostalgia because this is something that I remember as a kid. But but at the same time, it's well acted, it's well written, I think. Cinematography is pretty great. The characters are believable. The way they interact with each other is believable. And yes, the villains behave in a very cartoon-like fashion, but I mean, what can you do? That's just the way villains were portrayed back then, and I guess they're portrayed that way to a degree today. Whereas with the new remake of Roadhouse, I would probably give it like a 1.8 because
Ooh.
I mean, there's nothing about it that really stood out to me that made me say, "Huh, I really, really enjoyed that." Because even with the relationship that he had with the bookstore owners, I felt like, okay, yeah, I mean, he made a friend, but it really doesn't feel organic. It kind of feels like it's forced.
No, I agree.
And not to mention too, Dalton comes off as a guarded person, which if you have the past that he had, I can sort of understand where he's coming from. But I feel like naturally you would want to open up to to people and sort of like kind of feel them out, see where they're coming from, and kind of see how they react to you. He really didn't do that with anybody, really. I mean, he didn't do it with the doctor with whom he was supposed to be in love with. He didn't do it with his coworkers. I mean, he really didn't do that with anybody. I mean, even the supposed friendship he had with that girl from the bookstore, it still felt like, I can sort of trust you, but I'm still gonna like be standoffish. So no offense, honey. And not to mention too, I don't know. A part of me feels like it would have been better if they like filmed it like either in Missouri or somewhere close to it, can it kind of capture the spirit of it. I mean, instead of doing it in the Florida Keys, but apparently they want us to visit the Florida Keys, and all right, we'll check it out because apparently it's a very beautiful place to go to, even though it's
Very
expensive
violent
as
place
hell.
though.
Yeah, true. No, I will say this: I did. The one thing that I did like was the was that stage area where the bands were playing, because you remember in the first Roadhouse, at the very beginning, the band's playing behind that steel mesh fence,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
And you see that with the with the bandstand in the new Roadhouse movie. So I kind of like that callback right there. Because it sort of provides like that link. Oh yeah, the band's playing behind this steel fence because things can get pretty hairy. What I thought was a bit weird was the fact that they kept it up the entire time. They didn't bother taking it down even after Dalton came in. Not to mention too that apparently people in the Florida Keys are a lot more violent, because you did have that one scene where the guy is like, "Hey, play some Stones," and he starts trying to I think he either tries to rip up the fence or he like tries to attack the band. And I'm like, okay, so apparently people today are a lot more psychotic than they were back then, but I guess it's just a matter of perspective. So yeah, that's my overall score for both of these movies. But go ahead and let us know down in the comments below what you think, if you agree with our assessment, whether you enjoyed the original Roadhouse or if you think Jake Gyllenhaal knocked it out of the park. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch you on the next review.